Hello there friends, welcome back. I'd like to start off this video by asking you a question. What is the status of the persona you are portraying for your historical interpretation? When you think about this question, I want you specifically to think about how much money your persona would have. This is a question that's really important to ask as a reenactor or a historical interpreter or living historian or whatever you want to call yourself. It's a really important question because it will influence a lot of factors that go into how we portray our persona. Specifically, I want to talk about how it influences the clothes that you are wearing. If you're a long-term follower of this channel, you've probably realized that I like textiles. So today's video is going to be focused on one specific aspect of textile production, and that is the dyeing process, but more specifically still, exhaust baths. Now without a doubt there's going to be someone who jumps into the comments who knows a lot about dyeing who says exhaust dyeing is also known as batch dyeing. That's correct. Batch dyeing is a specific process of dyeing, but that's not what I'm talking about in this video at all. Batch dyeing generally involves a mechanical process, machinery that moves material through a dye bath. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the general gist of it. In the medieval period, they wouldn't have had that same machinery. So when I talk about exhaust dyeing, I'm talking about something different. Consider for a second that you've put on a pot of dye ready to dye some yarn. You mordanted the material, you soaked the dye stuff, then you added your material to the dye bath, sat it on the heat, made sure it didn't get too hot, sat it on the heat for a good period of time, and now you're pulling it off the stove. That material looks pretty good, that color's really vibrant, and you did well. Pat yourself on the back. Now what? This is the moment I want to talk to you about. If the color you got out of the pot was nice and vibrant and bright, you probably don't want it for a working class impression. That's not to say that your work was bad in any stretch of the imagination, that is not what I am saying. All I'm saying is, if you're someone who's working class, you're probably not going for the most vibrant dye stuff. So instead, we need to look at this dye bath again. If you're not familiar with the dyeing process, you might be tempted to tip out the water from that dye bath as soon as you're finished with your first piece of material. I would caution against that. As you can see here, this material is beautiful and vibrant. I love this material, and I'll probably turn it into something fantastic, but you know what? This particular skein of yarn is not going to go into my impression. Have a look at the water in this dye bath. Look at this colouring, how could you throw it away? Even though I already coloured some material with this, it's still got heaps of colour in it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that dye bath and we're going to dye more stuff. The first thing you're probably thinking is, do I need to do anything to this dye bath to use it again? And fundamentally the answer is no. If the dye bath worked a first time, it will probably work a second time. The big thing you need to think about is the material you're putting into the bath. As you would have with your first batch, you need to mordant your material before it goes into the dye bath. Small disclaimer, need is a strong word. Obviously there's exceptions. I'm talking about a general rule. If you liked the tone of the first batch of material that came out of your dye bath, mordant it exactly the same. The colour that you get out of it will be a weaker tone, but it'll be in the same vein. If you want a different tone to the first dye bath, you could perhaps mordant it with a slightly different mordant. If you mordanted with alum in the first one, maybe try mordanting with something like iron or copper for the second one. You could also try changing the pH in the water. This potentially will change cool tones to warm tones, or reds to oranges, or other variations on a colour palette. Keep in mind, for every lot of material that you put through this dye bath, it is going to get weaker. So the colours that you extract from them are going to be lighter and lighter each time you do them. This is not an undesirable effect. It can actually be to your benefit to do this. I say it'll work to your benefit for one big reason. The first batch of material that would have come out of a dye bath would have been more expensive. That means that as a working class person, it wouldn't have been your go-to material for making things like clothes. The alternative is to go for those second, third, or even fourth dye batches from that same vat or same dye bath. So while the colour might be slightly more muted, it will be more appropriate for your particular depiction. Let me just insert in here that while I say more muted, it doesn't necessarily mean less pleasant. Yes, I love brown, yes, I advocate for brown, and yes, I wear brown a lot, but that doesn't mean it is the sole extent of the colours possible for the working class. You can still get beautiful yellows, blues, reds, greens, pinks, all sorts of tones from second, third and fourth baths of a dye batch. And keep in mind too that the longer you have your material in a dye bath, the more colour it's going to absorb. Same as with your first bath, second and third baths will absorb more colour the longer they're in there. Just remember not to overheat your dye baths unless you want to end up with more drab colours. The particular dye bath I'm showing you is madder that had the water modified with calcium carbonate, because here in Victoria we have soft water and I was trying to go for hard water. So from this particular dye batch, I can probably expect paler reds and pinks from second and third dye batches. So now you know, when I talk about exhaust dyeing, I'm not talking about the modern mechanical process, I'm talking about the medieval process where you exhaust your dye bath of all the colour in it. I'm planning on going into a bit more depth about these exhaust baths in future videos, so if there's something in particular you'd like to see me cover, feel free to leave it down below. Thank you for watching, I appreciate you being here, but that's all I have for you today. Bye for now.